Now, and we'll just welcome in the last few people as they come in. So, good evening, good snowy evening to everybody, and thank you very much for making the time to join us today for what we at Democracy Caledon believe is probably going to be the first of many information and education sessions. The goal of this evening is to introduce you in a little bit more detail to some of the goings on that we're doing in the background in terms of research. At Democracy Caledon, one of our focuses really is doing a lot of the legwork that many of the members of the community just simply don't have the time or the ability to do. We have a phenomenal group of individuals who have really dedicated their time to being able to do research in areas of both their interest and their forte. And we're lucky this evening that we actually have a guest joining us as well, Victor Doyle, who will speak in more depth to his area of expertise. But as we start off this evening, I just want to thank you again for your time. And I'm going to introduce you first to Deb Crandall. She is the chair of Democracy Caledon, and she's going to introduce the topic of tonight's webinar, and in particular, set the stage for Victor Doyle's talk on how to properly plan communities. And also Al Axworthy, who will present some of our concerns with the way the town has approved the Brookfield Valley development in particular. But first, I'm going to turn it over to Deb, and she's just going to give you a bit of a synopsis of who we are. And then we'll get on our way. Deb, over to you.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Erica. So, it's a snowy night, and twice now Zoom has dropped. So I don't like to do it, but I am going to turn off my video to save some of the bandwidth. And Cheryl is going to be dealing with my slides. Cheryl, Linda Pym. Perfect. This is a photo by Pete Patterson. And it's really kind of a good perspective of why we're doing this. We're up on top of, in this case, the Niagara Escarpment, probably around the 10th Side Road, and we're looking south towards that looks like Toronto, and in the foreground is the Peel Plain, and it's that foreground, what we're seeing there, that wooded area, that is what's under threat with the recent rezonings and the reasons that we are around. So if you could change the slide, please, Cheryl. So Democracy Caledon. As Erica said, this is the very first of our community webinars. So for those of you who don't know us,
Deb, you're really breaking up a lot. Erica, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I'm going to jump in. So as you can see,
Deb, we can't hear you. Sorry.
Deb, we're going to mute you for a second. So those of you who didn't have the opportunity to come and join us when we did our last community information evening, I'm just going to walk you through sort of the briefest of reminders of who we are. So we are a non-for-profit volunteer-led organization, and we were started by concerned Caledon residents. We also have a number of individuals who join us who were longtime Caledon residents and still have interests in maintaining some of the democratic process that we're aiming to ameliorate in our group. Our focus really is on empowering citizens to engage in local governance. Our initiatives really aim to promote transparency, accountability, community participation. If you've visited our website, you'll see some of our pillars, and you'll understand that really, in supporting Democracy Caledon, you're contributing to the betterment of local governance. That's ultimately our focus. And ultimately as well the overall well-being of fellow residents. So what we're really doing is we're taking action to ensure that the town of Caledon does not become a template for developer-led use planning in the province of Ontario. And we're looking at that from a variety of different pillars. One of those in particular is, as many of you know, we have served the Caledon Council. And part of that is because, if you want to go to the next slide, Cheryl, many of you know that our pet project, if you will, is the recent choice to do some rezoning of 12 parcels of land. And our focus has been, as a group, taking a look at some of the actions that the town has been taking following this rezoning in terms of their approach to how these lands are developed. And we have raised concerns as individuals in the group in that we have a variety of areas of interest and areas that we think are not necessarily being well represented for citizens of Caledon. And in particular, I'm going to actually introduce you now to Victor Doyle.
Erica,
Who,
Erica,
yep, yes,
I'm
Deb.
back.
Oh,
I'm back.
lovely.
Yeah,
Oh,
sorry
yes,
about
this
that.
is great.
So I'm taking off video. I'll just try and go through as quickly as possible. So so as I was saying, Quinto Annabelli of Loopstra Nixon, he is well known to Caledon. He was the lawyer that Mayor Groves reached out to. He has on numerous occasions acted for the same developers of these land use planning appeals against the town and is closely aligned with a number of the developers that are involved in these parcels. So so I suppose from the mayor's perspective, Quinto was an obvious choice. So because who better to expedite the kind of development approvals for the Cordelucci's, for the Rice Group, for the De Gasperis family, and for Benny Morato than somebody like Quinto, who's had a front row seat all of these years. So could you put up the next slide if possible? So the town has not been idle since the June 25th council meeting when Mayor Groves, councillors Russo, Maskell, Rosa, and Napoli all voted to approve 11 of the 12 zoning bylaws. And the 12th was approved on July 23rd. In fact, things seem to have sped up since then. So, but what is surprising and really alarming is given that since Nathan Hyde has come on board in August of 2023, there has been an unprecedented turnover of staff across all the departments. The last senior manager to leave was Catherine McLean, who had worked for the town for 18 years. So not only are the ranks thinner than ever before, and the word on the street is that Caledon is no longer a great place to work, but there has been a mass exodus of institutional and intimate local knowledge of what and who Caledon is and has been. This is troubling because on more than one occasion, the mayor and her council allies and senior management all talk about expediting development approval. And yet we don't have enough staff with the expertise, the experience, and the Caledon-centric knowledge to shepherd this massive amount of growth in a fiscally and environmentally sustainable manner. Could you please switch over to the next slide, please? Yeah, so this is, I'm going to just go off my notes here. So this is a really, oops. Good. This is a map from the town of Caledon that shows this A4. So A4 is one of those 12 parcels. The red area is the secondary plan for this A4. And what we're looking at here is, if you look at the Hurontario, which is the eastern road that on the eastern side of that red line, to the east of that is Mayfield West or Southfields and Valleywood. That was the first phase. The second phase of Mayfield development is that which is bounded by Hurontario, Chinguacousy, by Mayfield and Old School Road. And within that phase 2 are a number of different stages. So the area bounded by the red is that A4, it's the last phase to be approved and to be built out to complete the Mayfield West. So that A4 is one of those parcels that was pre-zoned by the mayor. Some of the background is this is that the secondary plan, so, and Victor is going to go into what secondary plan, etc., was, what those things mean. There was a public meeting in February of 2024 for this secondary plan for that red bounded area. And this is 2 months before that March 26th announcement of the pre-zoning. When A4 was rezoned, it did not yet have an approved secondary plan. So on December 17th of last year, 2024, on the council agenda was staff brought forward a report and recommendation to approve that secondary plan. Democracy Caledon, as Erica said, we have some amazing, really knowledgeable people. We reviewed the documents and found that there were a number of concerning matters, primarily key foundational studies dealing with important things like traffic impacts, this conceptual collector road system that really looks at traffic flow, a stage and sequencing plan that talks about rolling out all of this, the community development, a conceptual collector road, functional servicing plan, and a comprehensive environmental impact study. So these are a lot of words, but these are all foundational studies that are key to determining what's this community going to look like. All of these studies had not yet been signed off by staff. They were not completed, and yet staff was recommending that this secondary plan be approved. But at this same meeting, and at the same time as the secondary plan was before council, Councillor Russo, who's our Ward 3, 4, 5 regional councillor, was prepared to bring forward a motion for council to approve the draft plan of subdivision, which is the next stage after secondary plan. And this is in direct conflict with all of the policies that say these foundational studies, they have to be completed, not only before you approve the secondary plan, but before you approve the draft plan. And then, so this, I'm not going to get too much into the weeds here, but there's a very strange thing happened, which is staff have what's called delegated authority, which means that they can approve these draft plans and they don't have to go to council. And this, we don't necessarily agree with this, but that is for a topic for another time. The thing is that when they do have this delegated authority, at least staff have ownership over the review. We know that they are involved in it, they're reviewing it, they're approving it. But what is so weird is that Councillor Russo was prepared to have council approve this, but there was no staff report. So staff had not weighed in, and yet council was approving it. And so it was kind of this weird hybrid thing where nobody's interests were being served. And we can only conclude that staff has really not been involved in a meaningful way in this very key foundational part of the planning process. So the upshot is the developer prepared the secondary plan and key studies that have not been vetted, signed off by staff or the TRCA. The developer prepared the draft plan of subdivision, no staff report, nothing to say that the staff have actually gone through this and said, does this meet our standards? Does this meet the way that Caledon wants to be developed? And as far as we know, the whole thing has just been rubber stamped. There are so many unanswered questions, and these were raised at the council meeting. They remain unanswered, and we're not going to get answered because the draft plan's been approved. And on top of that, it's already been zoned. And so it's a real possibility that for A4 and for those other plans, those other parcels, it's going to be the developers and their consultants who will be making those final decisions on how this community, this A4, 13,000 people, how that community is going to be built and how it's going to be designed and planned. And Al is going to be going over some of these areas later. So just final thing is I just want to leave you with one final thing. All of this has been facilitated by our mayor. And in 2018, she campaigned on and made a video which said, as your mayor, I will ensure that developers do not plan our community, but the people plan our own community and our own future. So on that, I would like to turn that over back to Erica. I hope that it wasn't too technical. But anyway, thank you very much.
Thanks, Deb. So the first thing I'm going to mention before we move over to Victor Doyle is that if you do have questions, please feel free to place them in the chat box. We're going to monitor them, and we are going to have an opportunity to answer some of the questions later on in the webinar. So next, and I just want to point out, today we are choosing to look at the A4 property as an example of some of the patterns that we are seeing from Democracy Caledon and how some of these parcels from the rezonings have been treated. And so if you do have other questions about some of the other parcels, we will in the future be addressing some of the nuances for those properties as well. But for now, I'm going to turn it over to Victor Doyle, who is a professional planner and the former manager of provincial planning for Central Ontario, where he saw the official plan approvals for most of the municipalities in the region, including Peel Region and the Town of Caledon. You may recognize his name because he was also a lead planner in the development of the Greenbelt Plan. Victor is now involved in advocacy and educational activities, including being a founding member of the Friends of the Golden Horseshoe and the Alliance for Livable Ontario. And he is going to be talking about the typical process for planning the urbanization of a new community. So I'll turn that over to you, Victor.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for inviting me here. I've talked to your group a couple of times. So I'm going to throw some slides and some maps up on the screen, I think, if we do this right. Let's start. So just bear with me for 1 sec. How do I start the slideshow? Slideshow. From the beginning, here we go. Well, Deb showed a picture of looking south from the escarpment. Here's another picture of Central Ontario. I'm a geographer by training as well, and I think it's always so important to understand we're dealing with a land base that is finite. It doesn't go on forever, and we need to manage it so carefully as we've lost so much agricultural and natural land over the decades. And including in Caledon, where the lands that have been approved for urbanization comprise, I think, roughly about 5,000 acres. That's a huge amount of land. And when we look at these little maps, it doesn't really seem that much. But when you're out on the landscape, you would know better than anyone. These are large, large tracts of land, including many, many farms. So let's just keep going. How do I do that? And so this is another version. This isn't Caledon, but this is the outward growth of the urban footprint that we've all witnessed over our lives. Across the length of the boundary of the Greater Toronto Area, every municipality pretty much. And so planning these greenfield lands, which look like farmland, but they've been approved for urbanization, is an extremely important point in time, not only because of the finiteness of the land, but the financial impacts that are associated with urbanization. And because when we urbanize, it's permanent. We may think we have an official plan for 25 years, but in essence, once we urbanize, it's for eternity, and it's not going back to farmland or natural land. So the decisions are even that much more critical. And that's why typically we have fairly complex and very comprehensive planning processes in Ontario, land use planning processes. And I've hosted delegations from around the world who come to Ontario to see how we do things, because we're recognized as a global leader in planning, despite some of the challenges we see out there on the landscape in terms of losing farmland and sprawling highway-dependent development. But in any event, in Ontario, we start with the Planning Act and our provincial policy statement. And then we have provincial plans like the Green Belt, the Niagara Escarpment, and Oak Ridges Moraine Plan, all of which are found and cover parts of the geography of Caledon. I think it's the only municipality with all those three plans applying to them. And then we have upper tier official plans, which the current administration, the Ford government, is doing away with. And so Peel Region used to have an official plan, and as of July last year, it became part of Caledon's official plan. And then, of course, Caledon itself has its own official plan and has for decades. And it, under that official plan, it creates secondary plans, which you heard Deb and Erica talk about to begin, and we're going to drill more into that. So it's a very hierarchical approach in Ontario. So the province speaks first, then the regions speak through their plans, and then the local municipalities like Caledon follow suit. And they all have to fit or match, conform, be consistent with the plans above them. And that way we ensure everything sort of lines up as we move down this funnel of more detailed planning. And even after the secondary plan process, which are parts, formal parts of the official plan of Caledon and other municipalities who use them, we get into what are called tertiary plans. In Caledon and other places like Vaughan and Brampton, they're called block plans. And they're even more detailed than a secondary plan. And then once all this detailed planning occurs, it's typically at that point that we get into subdivisions, which must conform with all these plans I've just mentioned, particularly the secondary and tertiary plans. And they're usually coupled with zoning bylaws, because subdivision and zoning go hand in hand, because that's where you're really into the nitty-gritty details of developing the land and submitting development applications. So, and then you get a building permit or sometimes a site plan. So that's generally the typical way things are done. And it's done for a reason, because it's a complex exercise. And typically we don't get to zoning till the very end because of all the need to do this other detailed planning first. So, sorry, I just turned that off. So this is the Peel Region official plan. And you might recall the diagram I just showed you. The province released the growth plan, which said we have to accommodate more growth. Peel was assigned a certain chunk of that. And Caledon, in this land in purple or brown, whatever it looks like to you, this is the 5,000 acres that was added in Caledon to the urban boundary of the region of Peel. There's all sorts of policies that go along with that at the regional level, which is now the town level, but that's the geography. So Peel did that, I think, in 2022, and it was approved a year or two later. So then Caledon followed suit. And this is from the older official plan, but you can see in gray all the area that's now going to be urbanized. And just to go back, this is the Mayfield area. This is Mayfield Road. Here's Bolton here. So the stuff in blue had been approved previously. And the purple or brown stuff is this new additional 5,000 acres. And so Caledon, with their official plan, followed suit in that hierarchy that I took you through with that diagram. Fair enough. And just for reference, this pink line is proposed Highway 413, which is a whole other story. I won't get into that. And then this is from Caledon's new official plan, I think, that was proposed, or maybe it's the old one. But they went a step further. And they said, okay, of that 5,000 acres, well, first the gray stuff, there's Mayfield West and Bolton that had been approved previously. The yellow and the brownish colors are all the 5,000 acres that were added. And the town has said, okay, all the yellow stuff is going to be residential primarily of some sort. And the brown is going to be employment lands, warehousing and other industrial land. So they took the next step in terms of getting more detailed. And then they went a step further with the new official plan, which was adopted in March 2024. It hasn't been approved yet. And this is half of the land area I've been showing you. Here's Mayfield West, the gray, the previously approved stuff. And so they've added even more detail. The yellow is residential, the pinkish brown is employment or industrial land, and they've added some conceptual green areas as well, some of the natural heritage system, and shown some of the streams and rivers. So they did that for both sides. Again, here's Bolton. And these are called the preliminary community structure plans. And that's part of their new official plan. But this is 5,000 acres of land, and this certainly isn't detailed enough to develop new community areas. And they've even kind of penciled in a grid of roads. You can see here these dashed gray lines. So that's as far as they got with the new official plan. And then they said, but there's way more work to do because there's a lot of things we need to look at: environment, infrastructure, financing, institutional use of schools, parks, all that stuff. And typically what they do then is they break it into smaller chunks. And all these little chunks, I think there's 24, 25 of them, the red squares with the letter and the number, those are all secondary planning areas. And so the town official plan says we're going to break it into chunks and start to do smaller portions of this. And the area Deb was talking about is B1, for instance. So far, so good. One step at a time sort of thing. So this is that diagram I showed you earlier. So we're down here. So Caledon has said, we're going to do 25 secondary plans to do the detailed planning for the 5,000 acres. But what did they do? They went ahead mere months after they adopted the official plan, and they passed zoning bylaws to allow 35,000 units within these yellow and orange areas, which is a portion of the overall 5,000 acres you'll see in this cross-hatching. And lots of people, including me, went, why are you jumping ahead to the zoning stage, which should be the last stage with the subdivisions, when you haven't even begun to do the secondary planning that your own plan that your council passed calls for? It was mind-boggling. The only reason they've said publicly is to expedite development. Well, without all the other planning, jumping to zoning is not going to do that. Plus, it's premature, as both Peel and the TRCA and people like me suggest, because they hadn't done the detailed work to inform that zoning. And the zoning they actually implemented, this is, again, part of Mayfield West. Here's your Ontario on the right. The EP in the dark blue lines, that's environmental protection. The UR in places like this and over here is urban, I think it's urban residential. Yeah. Or urban rather. And under that urban zoning, they allow virtually every type of use you could imagine, other than, industrial uses. And so, because we're dealing with a residential area here, So there's no granularity to the zoning. One can put any use, literally, there's 80 to 100 different uses within any part of that land. So the zoning is basically a giant white brush that you'd paint a barn with, and very unusual for planning a community of 13,000 people and who knows how many units in here, as well as all the schools, parks, commercial uses, etc. So this diagram might be hard to read, and you don't need to spend or try to read the details, but I just want to, I came across this when I was preparing here. This is actually from Brampton for the Mount Pleasant community. And this is a sort of a schematic, and I'm just going to talk in big chunks about it. This is Brampton's secondary plan process, where they do all sorts of background studies, have all sorts of public open houses and public meetings to inform the development of the secondary plan. And you heard Deb say some of the studies were not done or not completed or not signed off before the May A4 secondary plan was approved. But because planning's so complex, Brampton also uses this block plan process. I'm going to talk a bit more about that. And that requires even more studies and detailed analyses on environment and infrastructure, sewer, water, roads, stormwater, as well as fiscal studies. Because in any given secondary plan, you could have dozens of individual subdivisions. And so it's not till Brampton does this more detailed block planning that they then move to the subdivisions. And here down under the subdivisions, you can see zoning bylaws, because Brampton says we need to do our secondary planning and all the studies and analyses, and then we need to do the block or tertiary planning, and only then do we get to subdivisions and zoning. And so one of the things the Peel plan called for was this growth management and phasing plan. And so the Caledon official plan says they're going to do that, and it's going to inform where secondary plans are to be prepared. And you might recall that diagram. There was 25 secondary plans that the town is going to prepare. And this is to be done before new development is allowed or areas are opened up for development. And so the town, I think in November or something, came out with its growth management phasing plan. And the yellow areas and the dark blue are supposed to be the first phase, which runs from 2026 to 2036. Well, just focusing on the residential, which is the bright yellow, and the dimmer yellow is to 2036 to 2051. But these bright yellow areas were to accommodate 35,000 housing units. Caledon's own housing target to 2031 is only for 13,000 housing units. So to be trying to plan for 35,000 units in total over the next 10 years is beyond comprehension, and we're still struggling to figure out how and why the town thinks it needs to do this, or how it could do it in a responsible way. And if you actually look at these yellow areas and compare them to the zoning bylaws, they've added even more land for this first phase to 26, more residential land. So we're talking about even more than 35,000 units. But the town's saying it did the plan, the phasing plan, and it can move on. This is an example of a secondary plan in Caledon East, which has been approved for some time. Again, the yellow is residential, the blue is institutional, and the red is commercial. So those of you familiar with Caledon East will recognize Main Street. I guess the is it city center here, town center hall, I think something like that, or maybe it's here. But secondary planning. So the Caledon official plan, as I said, requires that secondary plans must be approved before development occurs, and in other cases, a tertiary plan, which they also call a block plan. And the secondary plans, this is language right from your own official plan, is to implement the official plan. So all the objectives and policies, oops. And this is no small matter, because these secondary plans are supposed to identify targets for how much population, how many housing units, what type of housing units are going to go into each secondary plan. They're to talk about the desired form and type of physical development. They're to set out a much more detailed natural heritage system, deal with cultural resources, institutions like parks and schools and community centers, transportation, stormwater, and the whole phasing and delivery of infrastructure. These are very, very significant matters. And to get a handle on those things, the official plan requires that these studies be done. Watershed study to start things off. And we know the TRCA said all these bylaws are premature because the watershed work has not been done. Agricultural assessments, again, transportation, energy, housing again, parks, physical impacts. These analyses are to inform the secondary plan preparation to meet all the policies and objectives of the town's official plan. So for the municipality to pass the zoning bylaws before they've done any of this work that their own plan that they approved calls for is just the wrong way to go, in my opinion, and what I've experienced over 35 years through planning municipalities throughout Central Ontario. So here's the Mayfield West secondary plan. And, you know, at some levels, you could think, well, anybody could draw that. Just figure out where the schools are. There's a bunch of schools, maybe a bit of commercial along a street, and then color everything yellow with maybe a bit more high density yellow along the roads. It's too simplistic. And that's why most municipalities developing thousands of acres of urban land require block planning. Because in this area, you could literally have dozens of subdivisions. And who's going to coordinate how all those subdivisions fit together? Which ones are actually going to get the school site? How are the roads going to line up? What's the best sequencing of sewer and water? And how's that going to be done in the most fiscally responsible way for the town and the region, which has a big role in both transportation, sewer, and water. And so the Caledon official plan says, yeah, we know it's complex. And so in addition to the secondary plans and all the studies we're going to require, we're going to, in certain cases, require these block plans. And again, the purpose is to create a comprehensive and detailed blueprint to coordinate all these individual plans of subdivision. And again, it's to detail all the things I just spoke about. And I'm going to whip through this, but the Caledon official plan actually has, I think, 20 different requirements for these block plans. You can see some of the things in yellow: sub-watershed, cultural heritage, transportation, energy, population, range and mix of housing, parks, community centers, water, wastewater, stormwater, timing of infrastructure, financial sustainability. There is a ton of work that goes into urbanizing a landscape like this that's going to be permanent in terms of the built form on the ground. And so back to this diagram. So Caledon did its official plan. It said it was going to do all these secondary plans with all these studies. It said it's going to do these tertiary or block plans with all those things to be looked at. And then it would typically go to zoning and subdivisions. But what Caledon did was say, well, we'll do this stuff later, the secondary plans and tertiary plans, and go right to zoning. It really is a back-assward way of doing this. And the zoning can't be properly informed without the benefit of all the analysis that is required at those other levels. And so back to this diagram again, you can see the sophistication of Brampton in terms of how it approaches this type of important planning, and as well, public open houses, public meetings. They're looking for input from landowners, different technical agencies, citizens, before they get to subdivision and zoning, because it's such an important exercise. And even once you get to subdivision, the Caledon official plan even calls for more analyses. So I won't go into that now. And I think this is the last one, yeah.
That's
But what
great.
Caledon did was go, we're going to park that planning, we'll do it later. We're going to zone all this land before we know anything about what those studies and plans look like. And we'll put what we call a hold on the zoning until we do all that stuff. But my view is the zoning can't be properly informed without having done that work first. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Victor.
I know that's riveting stuff.
Well, for a lot of the individuals that have joined us tonight, they may have missed some of the meetings that have covered that. So I appreciate you going through that in such a thorough fashion. I do want to say, before I hand over to Al Axworthy, who's going to put into perspective a lot of what Victor said in a very practical way that many of you can identify with, because we are going to discuss some lands that you're familiar with. Again, we at Democracy Caledon often repeat this, but we are not by any means anti-development. What we do identify is the town of Caledon has done a very good job, as Victor has pointed out, in indicating a structure and a flow with which they can follow to keep themselves at a level where they are obtaining best practices. However, we're not seeing a lot of that taking place. And as Victor so poignantly demonstrated, we see where those actions and the gaps in those actions are having a real effect on individuals. So I'm going to turn it over now to Al Axworthy, who is a Caledon resident, and he's actually going to be focusing on a number of the concerns and the unanswered questions we have, particularly around the Brookvalley development application. And what Al's going to do is be able to synopsize this and give you real world implications of exactly what happens when these processes in planning are not met. So I'll turn it over to you, Al.
Sorry, I just realized I was on mute. Thank you, Erica. I wanted to start with just going back to a slide that Deb showed and Victor showed earlier, which shows the 12 land parcels that were rezoned back in June and July. And the one highlighted with the blue is A4. And yeah, that's great. Please go to that next slide. Yeah, so that's Victor just was showing us some other secondary plans for other parts of Caledon. This is the secondary plan or one of the secondary plan diagrams for this land parcel A4. And I want to just point out a couple of aspects of this. As Victor mentioned, usually yellow is used to show residential areas. This particular property, this particular land parcel has a very, very significant portion of which is greenbelt and natural heritage system lands. And that's identified in as that green color. And in fact, it represents roughly 51% of the total land parcel is green belt and other heritage lands. So those lands cannot be developed. And one of the challenges with a development like this is doing that development without bringing any harm to those green belt lands and to the natural features of those lands. I might come back to this slide a little bit later, but if we could go to, one other thing before we leave that slide is it also shows the Highway 413 corridor, which is in that sort of light gray color. That is sort of the latest from the province of Ontario in terms of where they expect the actual highway would go if it's ever developed. And the hash lines around the outside of it, that bigger area around the outside of it is, it's called a narrowed area of interest, which is an area where other technologies may be run alongside that highway. And it's perhaps likely that that so-called narrow area of interest will be reduced once the province really locks down where they expect to develop this highway. But for the time being, a portion of those lands, the A4 lands, fall directly within not only the highway corridor, but this narrowed area of interest, particularly up in the upper or the northwest corner in the upper left there, and to a lesser extent at the top end, just close to the right side. Okay, if we could go to the next slide, please. So this is the draft plan of subdivision that was developed by Brookvalley. Brookvalley is the so-called Brookvalley lands is a collection of a consortium of 4 different landowners, and Brookvalley Project Management Inc. Managed the plan for developing those lands, and they represent about 85% of the total lands in A4 that are considered to be developable. So again, of that, just slightly less than half of what's developable. The Brookvalley lands represents about 85% of that. And again, you can see the Highway 413 corridor in this narrowed area of interest. Not only does it show in the upper right corner, but it actually, this narrowed area of interest covers the corner of the actual subdivision that's in this draft plan of subdivision. And of course, Brookvalley is, even with the draft plan approval, Brookvalley is basically signed off that they know that they cannot build in that area until such time as all the plans are finished for the 413 and the provinces decide what actual lands they require. So, so I want to talk a bit about some of the concerns and issues that we see that really are a result of this sort of rapid moving forward through a secondary plan that was approved in December, and now a draft plan that was just almost immediately after approved. Certainly, the Planning and Development Committee has recommended that it be approved. I suppose it still has to go to council in the next few weeks for approval, but they have it's the same. Members of Planning and Development Committee are the same as the members of council, so there's every reason to expect that it will be approved. So I would like just to start with you'll see, it's hard to see. I know the slides, the text is very small, but there's a yellow road running east-west that runs, loops down and eventually hits Chinguacousy Road. That road is referred to as Street A. And that particular road is, the town has stated that that east-west collector road that runs from McLaughlin Road over to Chinguacousy Road is absolutely necessary to plan for a continuous collector road system. And what they mean by that is they want a road network within this development that people can get into and out of without creating huge traffic congestion. And they see that this east-west corridor is absolutely key to achieving that objective. So that leads me to one of the big issues with that collector road is over to the immediate right by Ontario Street or Highway 10. Again, the font is very small, but I've put in that access to Ontario, Ontario and Highway 10 is not permitted by the MTO. So in other words, that street will have to terminate at Ontario Street, but will not be able to access Ontario Street or Highway 10. And that is, based on what MTO has been saying for, I guess, literally years on the other side of Ontario, where Dugo Avenue also abruptly ends at Highway 10 and does not access Highway 10. And that's one of the reasons for the congestion that exists in that part of Mayfield West. So the town has made, I guess, over the years, made several attempts to get MTO to, open or be open to the opportunity. But I believe the issue that MTO has is that road, Highway 10, is a very, very busy road, very high speeds, and to put any kind of a intersection at that location is deemed to be, it's going to slow down the traffic considerably going up southbound and northbound on Highway 10, and potentially there's a significant safety issue there at an intersection like that. So if 413 is ever built, there may come a time when that part of the Highway 10 will be downgraded, assuming that traffic coming up 410 will be going up to the 413 rather than going up Highway 10. But for the foreseeable future, again, the MTO, Ministry of Transportation, is just unwilling to allow that. Then if we go west over to the other side, and by the way, there are 4 valley crossings that I've highlighted in kind of that orangey brown color. There's 4 valley crossings, one just to the west of Highway 10, and then further along the Street A, there's a very, very lengthy valley crossing as it heads towards Chinguacousy, and then another short valley crossing as it reaches Chinguacousy. And that longer valley crossing, I went and looked at it on Google Maps, and I would say, it's several hundred meters in length. So it's going to be a very, very costly design and construction effort if that ever happens. And there's also another valley crossing a bit further north. Again, you can see it in that orangey brown, which is just part of what's called Street B, another key street to have traffic flowing. So within the Brookvalley development, there are 2 within their lands. There's 2 valley crossings, and then outside of their lands and basically outside of this draft plan of subdivision, there's 2 other valley crossings. But again, the town is saying that this Street A is absolutely essential to ensure that there is no significant traffic congestion within this this land parcel when it's developed. So, so that brings a number of questions into mind, like who is going to pay for those crossings? Presumably within Brookvalley's lands, they would be willing to pay for that. But for that very large crossing and the one further west, it's unclear as to who's going to pay for that. And certainly it wouldn't be the other landowners that represent 15% roughly of the non-Brook Valley lands that can be developed. And many of those landowners may never have any intention or desire to develop their lands. They may prefer to stay them. You know, some of them are farms, some of them are individual residences. So it's a big question we have, like who is going to fund that development, the design and the construction. And we keep coming back to, could it be the town? And if it's the town, it's a very, very large expenditure, one that the town may choose is not, may determine is just not economically viable, in which case that would imply that this Street A will never be completed to reach Chinguacousy, and therefore, the relief valve to get traffic out of this area will never be built. And again, so we're concerned that this area could end up having very similar congestions to other parts of Mayfield West. Just for your information, there's a green line there. That's right now, that is the former Orangeville-Brampton Railway Corridor that Peel Region purchased a couple of years ago with the intention of building a really significant rail trail system. And this plan of subdivision doesn't speak to that particularly. From what we've seen, there's shortcomings there in terms of they should provide more of a sort of more connectivity with the community there. It's really silent on the developer's responsibility for doing any of that. We really would like to see the developer be interested in constructing a multi-use hard surface rail trail that has basically leverages existing structure improvements and builds appropriate road crossings. And so again, there's not much of any information about what the developer would intend to help to make that trail system a very successful trail system, which will run from Brampton all the way to Orangeville eventually. Then there is on Street A, by the way, again, you can't see it because of the size of the font, but the draft plan of subdivision indicates that street will be, I believe it's 22 meters across. And if you were to go across Highway 10 over to Dougal, you'd see that is 26 meters across. And basically what we've discovered is that these roads that are highlighted in yellow basically are, in case of Street A, it's 4 meters narrower than equivalent streets are in the rest of Mayfield West. And Street B, the one that runs north-south up to that other valley crossing, is 20 meters wide when equivalent streets in the rest of Mayfield West are 22 meters. So it appears that perhaps for greater density reasons, the developer is narrowing the street right-of-ways. We don't know whether it's going to be the actual street or the paved part of the street that is narrowed, or whether the developer will instead opt to go with narrower sidewalks rather than a multi-use path that could accommodate more than pedestrians. We don't know that, but again, that's another question. And by the way, these are all questions and issues that we've raised at Council and the Planning Development Committee prior to their approval of the secondary plan and apparent approval of the draft plan. So if we could just step back to the previous slide, please. So one thing that other slide doesn't show is down McLaughlin Road bisects this A4 land parcel, and there's a text there. It says in blue, transition to 4 lanes. In about 2 years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, there was another subdivision built just below, and you can see part of it in this secondary plan drawing. And when that was being built, or prior to it being built, there was an agreement with the developer that the developer would basically initially fund the widening of McLaughlin from 2 to 4 lanes. And that is, commonly done. It's something that the mayor talks about as being how we're going to avoid going into debt. And so similarly, the town very much wants and plans to have McLaughlin Road widened from 2 to 4 lanes from that point north all the way up to the top of this land parcel, which is Old School Road. But there's nothing in the documents that I've seen around the secondary plan or the draft plan of subdivision that indicates that the developer is willing to do that, is willing to get into an agreement to fund that or to initially fund it and then recover it through a credit of development charges later once the houses are built. So again, this is a question. We don't know why that hasn't been agreed to at this point, and we don't know whether the developer is willing to do that or unwilling to do it. But by time we've reached a draft plan approval, that information should be known. And if it turns out that the developer is not willing to front end those costs, then there's only really 2 choices. The town would have to finance it themselves, borrow to fund that. And by the way, I believe it's the estimated cost is 13 or 12.9 billion or $1 million, 12.9 million. So it's a significant cost. And the other thing we fear is that because it's so expensive, and if the town were to have to fund it themselves, we fear that that road widening will be deferred to sometime in the future, which again is going to cause traffic congestion for those who choose to make their home in this subdivision and those who travel through this subdivision. So again, it's these are all issues that really should have been thought through much earlier, certainly at secondary plan time, and most certainly by time of draft plan subdivision, they should be worked out. And the draft plan of subdivision has got a number of conditions attached to it, which is not unusual, but many of these conditions basically speak to the fact that so many of these foundational studies have not been completed. Foundational studies that, in fact, in the case of draft plan, the official plan amendment that was just approved for that secondary plan, it stated that some of these foundational studies must be completed prior to draft plan approval. And yet, less than a month later, that draft plan was brought forward to the Planning and Development Committee and approved or recommended for approval, even though those foundational studies have not been completed. And so now the conditions in the draft plan says, well, they'll be completed before we get to registration of the draft plan, which could be quite some time in the future. And so we wonder how, and this is just one example of 12 developments that are being, potentially going to be fast tracked now that the lands have been rezoned. How is Caledon, and as Deb mentioned, with very little experienced staff, very little, historical knowledge of what's gone on in the town, how is Caledon planning staff going to be able to handle, this influx of all these multiple secondary plans and subsequent draft plans, and do it in a way that the right decisions are being made. And we can see that this is not Caledon planning Caledon, which is one of the things that Mayor Groves has said. It was, as Deb mentioned, it was in her mayoral campaign. This is developers planning Caledon, and it's there's no way around it. This is what we're seeing. So that's about all I have to say. Thank you.
That's great, Al. Thank you so much. So Al's given us a really practical look at, as he mentioned, just one of the 12 rezonings that have taken place. And so as a group, really what we've been trying to focus on is assembling that information for the larger public in order to simply just have access to this information. I know I'm taking a look here at the commentary, and Karen mentions, the traffic on Old Church or Mayfield that already exists. We've often seen at council, and including some of our councillors, take a look at how the Southfields development really was not entirely successful and some of the issues that they're dealing with. And yet, with the planning that has been going on, we're seeing a repetition of exactly the same kind of approach to those properties. And so really what we're trying to do is fill in the gaps for the public, because there haven't been a lot of opportunities for the public to have access to this information. And I notice here in the comments as well, Deb makes the point that the financial agreement has yet to be negotiated with the town and Brookvalley. So we have examples in the past of the developers not making good on some of the expectations. And yet we're still moving forward with a very similar pattern. And so that we find that concerning, because ultimately the financial implication and the implications in a variety of areas of life are quite evident. We are going to open it up if there are any questions for some of the information that's been posed. If you see in the chat, and we will make this available outside after this this presentation, but Victor Doyle has invited folks that if you do have a question you'd like to email him, please feel free to do that. And that also goes for our group. But I just want to open it up to our group right now. And if there's anyone who has a question, either you can type it in the chat, or please give us a hands up and we'll try to address any questions you might have. Let's take a look here, make sure I'm not missing anybody. Yes, so if you go down to the bottom where it says react, there is a raise hand tool if you're not familiar with it. And Ann Thompson, if we can have you taken off of mute by our...
Yeah.
Thank you, go ahead.
Hi, it's
go ahead.
That's okay. It's Alan and Ann both here tonight. The one thing is I do know this this section very, very well. This is part of the trinodal. This was created in 1980 for Mayfield West. And it was designed from Chinguacousy Road to Dixie Road to Old School. And that had to be all built up before we could expand outside the boundaries. Well, with the new official plans come in, the studies that have been done, and I do have copies of that stuff in a box stashed somewhere that I got to find, but I will get it to Al. The environmentals and the agriculture studies, everything was done on that whole block up to Old School Road and even beyond up into the Greenbelt, because we needed to do the environmental counts of stormwater, the water that comes down through those streams, and everything else for huge impact. So it's very complex. That road that Al was talking about was supposed to be the same as Tim Manley down below. That road originally, when we were talking about it, the reason why it was just below and not above is we used to plan, the planning was done by numbers. Brampton, Mississauga took what they want, Caledon got what's left over. So really, this is our the first time we can actually build complete communities. Before we couldn't. Unfortunately, to my disappointment, is not having the secondary plan really concerns me, Al, because that road is supposed to be like Tim Manley. McLaughlin Road had to be widened to 4 lanes right up to Old School was the plan before we allow any building to be done. And you can see what happened to McLaughlin down below. We wanted the road infrastructure first. And as the regional councillor of the time and the councillor of the time, that was my goal. The connection to Highway 10, Al, you're quite correct. They don't want access on. The plan was always with the developers, to either build an overpass or an underpass. And I think the feasibility over time will change, but I think it was looking at an underpass from the east side of Highway 10 to the west side of Highway 10 to go to Chinguacousy, eventually to Mississauga Road was the plan. GTWS corridors kind of got in the way there, so we'll find out what happens. Maybe it'll still be an underpass under the highway corridor, who knows, but you need to have those connections to move. The concern I have too with the 413, I hope they keep it wide because the LRT was supposed to be built along. We needed that for allowing us, if you want to get people out of their cars, we got to find different ways. And it's to connect with the Hazel McCallion up Highway 10 was eventually what the future would be 30 years out from now. So you have to look at big picture and what you can deal with now. So Al, I'm going to have to go through my boxes. I have the information. I just don't know where, but I think it'll be very useful to you. But again, I totally agree with everything. Not having a secondary plan, basically, you've just given away the house of cards. Everybody knows what you're playing with. So it's extreme, just completely insane. I really think we've tried to really plan a good community in Mayfield West, and then now it's just going to get. I have faith in the developers, but I don't have faith in the system that's applying it now. And Victor Doyle's quite right. There's a process to follow, and that's what you follow. And they've jumped the queue, not knowing and understanding. And I really believe that the developers, or no, the planners at the town, there's a lot of information and studies that have been done. And unfortunately, TRCA have approved a lot of it in principle up above, but Al, they won't sign off on it because they need to know where the stormwater ponds are. Until the stormwater, and you need a secondary plan. Hello, and not having that, how do you get TRCA to sign off on the final environmentals? A lot of that work has already been done. But you're right, the traffic flows, different things, densities, all this is a challenge. And especially the reason why the development's been asked to be held off around the 413 was because with the LRT, that way you can intensify a lot along that corridor. That's the idea. But unfortunately, no planning report, no planning or staff report to explain what's been done. I can understand why people are, well, we're all upset. I'm upset. I'm extremely, because there's a lot of work done that no one knows or has a clue what it's about. But on the other hand, they've just given away the keys, as you say, the developers have it. So I think we've been sold a bill of goods of what the elected officials said they were there for, and they've done the complete opposite. So similar to what we have down the States. We don't know what's coming next.
We really appreciate
predictable is not predictable, but I'm just saying, Al, we'll go off. I'll follow up with you, and I'll have to find I got about 2 or 3 boxes of stuff that I think you can find useful for a lot of this.
We really appreciate your perspective on it. And
it's not questions. I'm sorry, but I'm trying to give a backstory.
So
there's been a lot of good work done, but without a secondary plan, I don't know where you go with this. I really don't.
yeah, we appreciate that. And you've actually brought up a really good point. You don't necessarily need to be the former mayor to have a lot of research. I know there are a lot of people in the group here who have pet projects and areas of their expertise and areas that they've done deep diving with. And I am going to address a couple of the last questions here. I do want to be mindful of people's time, and I will go through some next steps before we say goodbye. But I do want to point out, whether you are an official member of Democracy Caledon or not, we appreciate that there are so many people in the group who really have been doing a lot of work for a long time on particular areas of interest, and we are absolutely open and welcome any of that work that you've done. We want to promote transparency. That's ultimately what we're here to do. We really are just Caledon focused on Caledon, and we want to do that in the most democratic and transparent way. So that being said, I'm going to move on to the not Linda Pym, who has her hand up. Cheryl, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I'm running under Linda's account. So it is Cheryl. I wanted to ask Victor a question. And thank you all for doing this. This was one of the properties that I was extremely concerned about because of the great amount of greenbelt land. I think it is absolutely a strategy when then they do the secondary plan that they do that in black and white, so you don't see the greenbelt over it, but there is a tremendous amount of greenbelt here. And when I reviewed the environmental reports, there are endangered species, there are significant wetlands, and this was also one that Premier Ford tried to sneak an MZO on right before the greenbelt scandal hit. And when I look at this, no staff report, Councillor Mario Russo put forward a motion to approve it before there even was a staff report. So there's no assurance that anything in that plan is going to minimize the damage to the greenbelt. Is it possible to put that kind of intensification in without causing damage to the greenbelt? And why the heck do we have to build in the greenbelt? There's lots of other places where we could put houses and intensification rather than in the greenbelt.
Yeah. Very, very good point, Cheryl. Thank you so much.
Yeah, Vic's going to answer. I asked Vic to answer.
Victor, do you want to take that?
Yeah, so I don't think the development's actually in the greenbelt, although some of the roads may cross it. But clearly there's fingers of the greenbelt that come south from the Niagara Escarpment or Oak Ridges Moraine right up to the edge of where we've urbanized or approved for urban. So development as it moves north will be on either side of some of these greenbelt fingers, the valleys in particular. And so I think that the key is to assess it and design the development with appropriate buffers and setbacks and restoration efforts along the edges to maximize it, and then to deal with the stormwater properly to keep the streams clean. So that's sort of the mitigation. And unfortunately, there is going to be development along these river valleys as they come south, but we made them quite robust, a lot wider than where we used to allow development up to these river valleys. So hopefully that will help over time as well.
And thank you for that, Victor. I'm going to move over to Andrew because I think he can probably expand on that if I have a gut feeling on what he would like to speak to.
Hello.
Hello, welcome.
Yeah, I think it's far more than a gut feeling. It's thoroughly predictable what I'm going to talk about. I want to thank Alan Thompson for, I think he was the first one to talk about stormwater. But it's not just stormwater. Stormwater's one of the end products. And I really salute the tenacity of Democracy Caledon for fighting the developers on their own damn territory. Billions of dollars seeking tens of thousands of houses for families who have panicked the premier into a housing action plan that is falling on its face. The real issue to me is watershed security. When you cut down, a certain percentage of the forests, and the feds say that 40% is a minimum guideline for healthy watersheds. When you cut below that, when you further change natural heritage lands into hard surfaces, which yes, contribute to stormwater, but you've already polluted the system. The system's not going to function because you cut down all the damn trees. And this town has changed their official plan. They went away from an ecosystem approach to a landscape features approach, and they're ignoring section 4.2.1 of the PPS. And it is it's a naked land grab for profit, and water doesn't count. So thank you for letting me do my little rant. If I lived there, I'd be fighting this completely on the PPS. You guys are fighting it because you're looking into the face of the devil and you see what he's trying to do. So I really appreciate your tenacity.
Well, we appreciate the vote of confidence, and we also appreciate you sharing your knowledge and your expertise. And a small little plug, the Ontario Headwaters Institute has some phenomenal resources, so please go over and take a look. They're really valuable documentation.
Well, no. Wait till Saturday.
Would you like a shameless plug? Go ahead.
Well, if you would forward, well, I'm on Democracy, the Google group, so I will send a note to Google groups. We're publishing a 9-page discussion paper on an outcome-based framework for watershed security. It will blow a lot of people's minds. Yeah. But you guys need to stick to your knitting.
Thank you. Okay, I do want to address a comment that was made, and I want to kind of expand on it. I know there's a bit of a conversation that's going on, and I haven't had a chance to follow up on it in terms of the commentary here. But there is a comment ultimately really about history and backstory and documentation. And what I will speak to, you can follow the conversation in the chat, but what I do want to speak to before we take a moment to thank you and give you an opportunity to also participate is that we do have a concern at Democracy Caledon that there has been a very aggressive turnover of staff at the town. And one of the elements that does concern us is really that legacy and that history that a lot of those individuals did have that we don't really have access to. And we could probably casually get into a lot of a conversation about what's happening at the town, why it's happening, but ultimately we are left in a situation where there really just aren't a lot of well-versed hands on deck. And so, we do encourage you, we do encourage you that if you do have background, many of you, I'm taking a look at the names, many of you have years and years and years of background on some of the properties, some of the goings on. So we really do encourage you to step forward and share that information with us. And like some of the comments say, it really just speaks to a lack of institutional knowledge, and that's concerning. So finally, if there are no other questions, I just want to speak to calls to action. So what can you do? Because I saw that Karen said, what are the next steps? One of the questions was, what are the next steps? So obviously I've gone on and on about if you are doing your own research, please, we welcome it. Please come forward and share your information with us. Obviously, we ask you to call or write your counselor. Our goal is to arm you with as much information about these properties and the goings on as possible. And so please lend your voice to that. We encourage you also to attend the upcoming planning and development meetings or council meetings. And if you feel comfortable about that, report back to us on that. We are a mighty group, but we can't be everywhere all of the time. So we appreciate any support that people can lend in that vein. Also, please, if we're encouraging you, delegate. Delegate at upcoming council meetings. If you haven't seen it yet, we do have on our website resources page a Learn to Delegate infographic. So if you have a little trepidation about delegating, that's a step-by-step guide to how to delegate and demystify what it is to actually participate at council meetings. If you're not comfortable doing that, then we encourage you, please just discuss the issue. I'm sure that everybody has learned something small and new, and we encourage you to discuss that with your friends, your neighbors, your community groups. Really what we're looking to do is just get the word out. When people are feeling the pressure at the town to meet best practices, we hope that that's going to raise them up into a situation where they're going to be feeling like they need to be held accountable. And we ask you to engage with our communication material. For those of you who haven't been, that weren't at our last in-person meeting, we have handbills, we have buttons to share, we have lots of information so that you can man yourself with that information if you are chatting with friends, neighbors, and community groups. And finally, I encourage you to prepare yourself for the next meeting we have. We are going to have a series of these. Some of them are going to be looking like tonight at particular parcels, and some of them are going to be opportunities for other community members to really, fellowship and exchange information, ideas, and help educate the greater group. So we encourage you to keep your eyes posted or your eyes on our website, and we will have things posted. Let me just take a little look at this. I don't want to leave anybody out here. We received a direct message. So let me look at that. Is this something where ethics and legal commissioners can be brought in, given the never-ending questionable circumventing that some councillors are doing? Or can council effectively do what they want, and it's only public pressure that creates change? Who in our group would like to address that? Rob, I don't know if you'd like to address that or you have a question, but maybe I'll put that on you since you are a former council member.
Sorry, I was just looking at something on my phone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I'm just looking at the chat. Can you repeat the question?
So it was, is this something where ethics and legal commissioners can be brought in, given the never-ending questionable circumventing that some councillors are doing? Or can council effectively do what they want, and it's only public pressure that can create the change?
So the one thing that jumps out to me is Caledon does have an integrity commissioner, which basically all councils are bound to follow, the oath that they took and to follow, to conduct themselves in a certain way. And then if any member of the public has issue with that, they can raise that with the integrity commissioner, who will review it and do an investigation if it's warranted. And I don't want to be pessimistic, but earlier on we were talking about all the changes at town hall with staff, the CAO Nathan Hyde, and so who the integrity commissioner is now, I'm not certain, but I would be concerned whether if a legitimate concern would actually go through a legitimate integrity commissioner's process. But having said that, and again, I'm hoping, I don't want to be overly pessimistic. That is one avenue where someone, if they feel like something is unethical and is not following councillor code of conduct, the integrity commissioner is one way to vet that.
We appreciate that. Very.
Can I just add one more thing? I did have my hand up for another reason.
Yes, please
It'll
go
be
ahead.
very quick. It may seem like a tiny thing amongst all that we've spoken about, but I think it, for me anyways, gives perspective. And I could be wrong, but I don't think I am. The 5,000 acres is the sum total of the 12 parcels. And one of the graphics you had was broader than that. It was the hatched areas, which is the further settlement boundary expansion, which basically goes from Old School all the way down to Mayfield, clear across the town and then around Bolton. That's 14,500 acres. So it's nearly triple. So if we're putting 35,000 in the 5,000, you can only imagine. And again, this is all our best prime agricultural land. So I just wanted to put that out there. For me, that really puts things into perspective, the scope and scale of this. Thank you.
Absolutely. And I think that's a very valid and important thing to bring up. I see you, Deb. I am going to give the mic over to you. I just want to address that. Oh, would you like to address Nicola's question? Or would you like me to do that? Nicola's question isn't that what DC's lawsuit is all about?
Well, that's what I was going to say, is that
Yeah.
We are we're feeling pretty confident, given the caliber of the legal team that we have and the information that we've got, is that many of these are illegal and can be canceled. So if we are successful, when we are successful, the court, the Superior Court of Justice for Ontario will tell the Town of Caledon that stop these bylaws, cancel them, and start this process again. Go back to the normal planning process. So that's an avenue that is we're actively pursuing. There are other opportunities where we might find a financial advisor, somebody who understands municipal financing, and to do an analysis of the fiscal impact assessment that was done, and to actually create a critique and a third part and another perspective. Also, planning. I mean, Victor has given us so many hours of time to actually put together a document and, make it available to the public about what's going on. So I think there's different avenues available to us. We are actively in a fundraising mode. I don't think we can not mention that we do have a rather, it's a $125,000 campaign, legal fees, communications, etc. So we welcome any donations that people can make to the cause. We have the Small Change Fund, or directly to Democracy Caledon. So we're feeling very confident that, in fact, this legal challenge will be successful.
Yes, Mira. Oh, there we are.
Yeah. Okay. For somebody like me, and I really tried even on social media to stay away from the 12 properties things. I've spoken to counselors who are for it. I've spoken to counselors who are against it. And I actually even had a conversation with Nicola. And it's so hard because they're so convincing on the side that they believe in, which has got me even more confused. I don't even know what to believe. And I'm pretty sure I am like 90% of the Caledon people, because even with people that are so against it, you talk to them and they're so convincing. The ones that are for it or the supporting this, and they're so convincing. It's so hard for so much of the residents to really understand it. Although I'm sitting here and you guys are telling me this stuff, and then I've heard other stuff. It's so hard. I don't know, like, where do you go to, figure it out? And I mean, this is why I'm here, but like I'm telling you, and I did say this to Nicola when I was talking to her a while back, everybody's just so convincing in what they believe in.
Right. Right. And we appreciate that. We really do appreciate that. We appreciate that there is an aspect of government that, whether we like it or not, that's part of the shtick, is the sale, right? And there are a lot of people here that have seen that time over time, counselor over counselor. We've seen that. the goal really with Democracy Caledon is to try to do as much investigation and as much dispersal of that information in as neutral a way as possible. We try to be neutral, but there is a lot, even for our own group, we get a lot of pressure with a perception of who and why we do what we do. But our goal fundamentally is outlined on our website, which is what we are looking for is clear, transparent, responsible, democratic government. And unfortunately, there just isn't enough manpower at the town often to be able to do that. And I'm not talking about council, I'm talking about just folks to do the work. And we're very blessed and we're very lucky that we have a lot of people in this group that have expertise across the board, and we try to provide that information the best way we can. But ultimately, it's up to the individual to take the information and do with it what they can. I know Deb is going to be itching to comment here.
Yeah.
I just wanted to, is it Myra?
It's Myra. Okay, Myra, you go ahead.
I would love to know, I'd love to, when we get off this call at some point, is to talk to you and try to understand what it is you need to, what do you need to help you make a decision about where this is at? And so I don't know what kind of convincing is required. And so maybe we can have a conversation about that, because I completely sympathize with you. I'm exactly in the same thing.
Yeah.
When I talk to Mario Russo, when I talk to the mayor, they're so convincing.
That's
you
and
don't-
I've talked to a
when
lot
you-
of council. Yeah.
Yeah, when you don't have that technical knowledge. So can we talk further about this? Because I'd love to get your perspective on what is it we need to do, or what does the town need to do to bring some transparency to this issue, because it's very polarized.
Yeah.
So,
Agreed.
we'll be
So just being mindful of everyone's time, I want to get you out, but I do want to double down on Deb's comment of if you don't want to support us in any other way, but you decide you want to do a little bit of a donation, we will always take it. It goes directly to our legal work. All of us otherwise are volunteering our hearts out. And then the final thing that I do want to say is, if you would like for us to connect with a community group that you are part of, or you have a community group that wants to interact with us, please, 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 we encourage you. So an example might be the road safety group. We want to hear what people are doing in their groups. We can't do everything. So we need folks who are specialists in their own area to come to us with their concerns, because ultimately what that does is that helps us paint a picture and put the pieces of the puzzle together, so that as a community, Caledon can come forward and say, this is what we require of our individuals in government in order to hear our voices and do what they're meant to do, which is work on behalf of us, not work on the behalf of developers or anybody else. We want to build healthy, vibrant communities that work. And in order to do that, we are hoping to hold people accountable in that work. So if you have any other questions, we are going to sign off, but if you have any other questions, please, please, we have all kinds of resources on the website, and please message us.